Good morning, church. Glad that you're with us this morning. Have a seat. We are going to get into the Word of God. You can take your Bibles, if you would, and turn to Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians 5, as we continue our study of Ephesians, and we're winding toward Christmas, so what else would we do but talk about marriage again? So we're going to spend some time thinking about these final three verses in this section in Ephesians on marriage. When I was back in a former life, I played college basketball. I know this frame before you. You naturally assumed that when you saw me up here. But when I played, we had one particular year, we went to a tournament, kind of an end of the season tournament in Iowa. And there were 8 teams in the tournament. We walked in. We were, and I mean this honestly, this is very objective. We were the best looking team walking into the door. And I say that because when we walked in, I mean, as a college basketball team, I'm all of 5'8" with my shoes on, but our front line, our 2 forwards and our center, it was 6'7", 6'7", 6'8". We're a small college. We looked the part. It was incredible. We finished last. And what was the bummer is that we really were the most talented team that was there at that tournament. And it was kind of evident, but we also were a bunch of selfish, individual, Bible college jerk folk. And we could not get on the same page. And that has always been an illustration to me of how you can have everything looking great. But if you don't sort of honor the individual responsibility, if you don't honor the individual gifting, if you don't recognize the power of what it means to function together in an enterprise, you can have all the individual pieces available to you. But without the synergy that unity affords, what you have is just a wasted opportunity. So I want to use that as a segue in thinking about marriage a little bit. It's much stronger than simply a college team in that sense. But the consequences are similar. They're just incredibly more drastic. I mean, in life, as a married couple, you don't just forego a trophy. You don't just leave bragging rights at the door. You don't just disappoint people who are anticipating something watching you. You can destroy lives. You can wreck people. And so there's a lot at stake when it comes to what it means to have a kind of marital unity. And that's what we're going to think about as we continue thinking about the new way. And what I want you to do as we think about the new way of marital union, I want you to let your eyes go back in chapter 5 a little bit earlier to a text. Look in chapter 5 and verse 15. We read, "Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of time." And if you can remember back probably a couple months ago now when we looked at that text, I mentioned to you that word for time is kairos, the opportunity. Not chronos, that which charges forward, but make the best use of the occasion, the opportunity afforded to you by God, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Now, it's not far in the text for us to get to these household codes. And what you've got is this building idea from what the new way is characterized by, then particularly with the seizing of moments and the seizing of opportunities. But now that's building, among other things, the spirit-filled life that he talks about in the next few verses. And then walking into the household codes, what it means for us to seize the moments in a spirit-filled life, to be the kind of people constituted such that we could happen to marriage in a way that would bring honor and glory to the Lord. Now, look with me in verse 22, and we're just going to remind ourselves of the context. "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. We talked about that a couple weeks ago and what it means to live in the new way of being a wife. Last week, we looked at the new way of being a husband. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present to the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. And that's where we left off last week. Now I want you to see the first word, therefore. Therefore. So there's something about what's been said, particularly in regard to a husband's role to his wife, that is acting as a basis or a connection point in some way to what he's about to say in culmination in these next 3 verses. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother, hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. What I want to do is think through 6 crucial realities about the marital union tucked away in these last 3 verses of this. The first one just deals with this therefore. It's a little bit of a long point, but it's stated in a way that I hope you see the importance of it. The marital union establishes a compelling data point for grounding sacrificial love. This is what he's doing in this mixture of Christ in the church and husband and wife. He's trying to show that, listen, Christ is connected to his church, and that connection is deep and abiding. And that connection is born from his laying down his life for the bride. And because he laid down his life for the bride, the consequence of him laying down his life for the bride is that union comes to be in fullness. And so in transition, the first thing we have to say about a marital union is that the dynamics of that union in and of itself are absolutely connected to what it means for particularly you as a husband. Yes, it includes your wife's role to you, but particularly and contextually, you as a husband to live in sacrificial love. The sacrificial love for you as a husband that acts out in sacrifice that sanctifies, as we talked about last week, helps establish and ground and connect to the union that you have in a way that is utterly mysterious in many ways. It's one of the great mysteries. What is it that it does? It produces the capacity for trust. It produces the capacity for benevolence. It produces the capacity for proper reaction, because as I've established and tried to say to you all, we don't look at a man in marriage and say to him, be a leader. It's a superfluous statement. We look at a man and we say, you are a leader. Now, do gooder. Get after it. Do it right. Look like Jesus in that way. And so I want you men to understand at the beginning that your sacrificial love is crucial, both as an inflow and as a reciprocal outflow of what it means for you to be living in union together, right? Now, this whole idea of living in union is a little mysterious. What does it mean to speak about two becoming one and all that stuff? And so we want to think a little bit deeper about that. But this first point is just real simple, really important. Now, right after this, we get a quote from Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. It's very, very close. It's not the only text of Scripture in which the quote is used or the quote is rendered, but you see it right there. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Now, we're going to think about leaving and holding fast in a little bit. What I want you to do first is I want you to think about the most organic, most natural components of this whole idea. It's a man and a gune in the Greek, translated a woman or a wife, right? Now, I'll grant you that if I went back in a Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure time machine to a few years before, and let's say it was 50, 60, 100 years ago, I'd preach this message really differently. I don't know how much I'd even pause on this point. I don't know how much I would talk about the idea that, hey guys, a marriage is a union between one man and one woman. For most people hearing that 100 years ago, it would be like me saying, there's a chair. Let's close in prayer. It's obvious. Is there anything that grounds the natural order more than the idea that a man and a woman come together, procreate, live together in a unified dynamic, and on goes civilization? It's literally the most recalcitrant reality. What's recalcitrant mean? Stubborn, will not change, no matter what comes up against it, reality. If it ceased to happen, none of us would exist. So it's sort of important that it happens that way, and yet we do need to say probably a couple of things about it. So I want to highlight there's at least three things that show up even in that statement that is quoted here from Genesis 2. The first is that marriage is not a social construct, but it's a divine institution. If two people are living together and they say, I love you too. We don't need a piece of paper to validate our love for each other. I'm committed to you. I'm committed to you too. All those people that are pressuring us to get married are a bunch of fuddy-duddy Luddites that don't understand the modern world, and they're caught up with a piece of paper. Hey, it's just a piece of paper, babe. Yeah, babe, it's just a piece of paper. Brother and sister, it ain't just a piece of paper. It ain't just a piece of paper. That's not what marriage is. Marriage isn't hopping down to the justice of the peace to get ink to dry on a piece of paper. Marriage is what? What is marriage? Marriage is established and created by God. It wasn't engineered by men and by women who looked around and said, we got to figure this thing out. And I guess we ought to live together in the same house. I don't want you sleeping with somebody over here, so I guess we ought to get us a piece of paper that'll keep us from doing that with each other. And you sign it, and I'll sign it, and then when we're tempted to walk outside the confines of this marriage, you walk over to the drawer, pull it out, and go, remember the piece of paper? Don't do it. You signed a piece of paper. If you think it's just a piece of paper, that does nothing to secure fidelity. Signing a piece of paper? What is it? Well, Malachi 2, 13 through 15. And this second thing you do, he's talking to priests who are walking in infidelity in a couple of ways. One of them is they're walking in infidelity even with their own wives, but they're also walking in infidelity to God. They're not worshiping God properly. Both those are converging. They're indulgent. So Malachi, the prophet, is indicting them. And the second thing you do, you cover the Lord's altar with tears, with weeping and groaning, because he no longer regards the offering or accepts with favor from or accept it with favor of your hand. You come, you worship, and you go, oh God, help us, our lives are falling apart. We need you so bad. But you say, why does he not? Why don't you listen to us when we come to you and worship? Don't you want us to worship you? We're the priests. Why doesn't he listen to you? Because the Lord was witness between you and the wife of your youth, to whom you have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. Sweetheart, I do. I do too. And who did you say all those things in front of? Aunt Sally, Uncle Jim, Skeeter and Scooter and Jim Bob, Guadalupe and the rest? Maybe. But you said them before God, because the Lord was witness between you and the wife of your youth. Because God was in the building. Because every time there's ever been a marriage, God was invited. And he was there. And you said those things before him. You can never lose sight of that. You have to keep that in front of you. He is the one you're covenanting in that way to, as you covenant with before these people. To him, with her, with him, before these people. And it was a covenant. Did he not make them one with a portion of the Spirit in their union? Isn't that interesting? Isn't this thing designed by God himself? In fact, isn't he in right the middle of all of this? Isn't leaning into your marriage then a kind of place in space where you could find the Lord? Looks like it. And what was the one God seeking? Godly offspring. So guard yourself in your spirit and let none of you be faithless to the wife of your youth. He brought you together so you would have multi-generational faithfulness. That you would not just have children, but you'd have children, and then you'd be able to, if the Lord afforded you that blessing. If he doesn't, you'll use your marital union as a union to bless other young people. But you're going to look downstream as a married couple, regardless of whether it comes biologically or not. And you're going to look downstream, and you're going to bring others into covenant faithfulness because you were faithful to your covenant. So first and foremost, what is it? It's a covenant with God because God is the one who created it. Second, it's a man and a woman. Men are not men by social construction. Women are not women by social construction. What's a man? What's a woman? There are clearly defined realities of what it means to be a man. In the ministry I'm a part of and teach with Better Man, we talk about how a man has certain functions. He courageously follows God's word. He selflessly loves God's woman. He's conscientious to enter in to God's work, and he is trying consciously with who he is to better God's world. Those functional pieces and how they're expressed are not just simply imperatives or injunctions to a person, that there are those things that make you a man that are uniquely gifted to you as a man, gendered to you, not merely at the level of your body and a physical apparatus, but actually at the soulish level. The same is true of you as a woman. There are things about my wife as a woman that are not about her as Jennifer in the uniqueness of her personality. There's things about her that make us immediately complementary. There are personality traits, ironically, that make hurdles for us against complementarity. Only child, oldest of 6. Good luck with that, said the counselor. Right? And yet, woman, man, created, right? She is literally like the Hebrew term. She is built by God for him. She's built by God for him is the way that Genesis 2 talks about it. Gender is not a social construct. Instead, God said, hey, I'm going to create man in my own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Interestingly, later on, when marriage gets discussed in the context of divorce, we read Matthew, quoting again from Genesis, he answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And he said, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife. In light of the fact that he creates man and he creates woman, he does so for distinct purposes. One of those purposes is union. This doesn't eliminate singlehood. 1 Corinthians 7 has a lot of teaching about what it means to be a godly single person, and God may call you to that in his economy. So don't feel neglected in this message, but this is a message about marriage. He shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife. Same language, two shall become one flesh. So they're no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. So we live in a world right now, though, where gender is seen as a social construct and it's seen as a fluid concept. Social construct and a fluid concept. Always when you get talking about gender in the public square, we get talking about anomalies that emerge. Well, Bryan, you know, there's men, there's women, and then there's intersex. We talk about, right? We talk about intersex, talk about gendered anomalies. And I think it's important that we talk about that. I just think it's important that we talk about it properly. So let's understand a couple of things, and let's start theologically. The first is, I've had ringing in my ears about the past day and a half, off and on. What's happening to me? Well, some might say, Bryan, in February you'll turn 50 years old. That's what's happening to you. Because when I talk to some of you that, don't be offended, are boulders upstream from me a little bit, you might say, yeah, I know. Sometimes we battle with that, and it comes and it goes, and I experience that too. So it's part of what happens sometimes. And the ringing is a reminder. And what's the reminder? The reminder is that no matter how much I run, and I try to run each week, and no matter how much I work out to keep this chiseled frame before you, I'm still just falling apart one day at a time. And all I'm doing is trying to slow it just a little bit, right? Because the fall has impacted my physiology. That's true, and it's true of everything. It's true from I get old to there are anomalies for people at birth, to there are things that set on with children that make us feel like that's not fair, to situations we find ourselves in life in a fallen world. But it's just true, and it's true physically. It's also true not just physically, though. It's also true emotionally, psychologically. It's true in our mental sort of framework. It's true emotionally. It's true socially. As the fall comes into every aspect of our lives. So first, we should recognize that we should expect theologically literally nothing more than that there would be gendered anomalies that would be, by nature, anomalies. That is, they would be outside of the norm. But something outside of the norm doesn't now take gender and say, gender is put on a scale, and it's now on skates, and it's entirely fluid. Okay? So there was a study that was done by a woman named Ann Fausto Sterling. She teaches at Brown University. She teaches gender studies at an Ivy League school, and you can imagine how that study went. And as she wrote about gender fluidity, she gave a statistic that has in much of the academy become a kind of standardized statistic for what qualifies as intersex. And I wanted to mention this because I think it's actually relevant in the discussion that we have outside the walls of this church. So here's a quote from her. Based on an assessment I conducted with Brown University undergraduates, I also estimated intersexual birth rates to be about 1.7%. And I have since been called on widely by journalists and other experts to examine these issues. So if you go online and you Google what percentage of people are intersex, the first thing you're probably going to see is 1.7% come up. I want to tell you, don't believe it. Don't believe it. And the reason why you should not believe that is because the criteria that she established for what qualifies as intersex. If there's 1.7%, it means that almost 2 out of every 100 people are not mapping onto a biological binary. And I just want to put that myth away because that is a myth. Leonard Sachs is a guy that graduated from MIT at 19 years old. He's an MD and a PhD. Got both at the University of Pennsylvania, and he writes in this field and other fields. And Sachs did an analysis of how Anne Fausto Sterling arrived at her data that's being used all around of 1.7%. And I wanted to read you his quote. Anne Fausto Sterling's suggestion that the prevalence of intersex might be as high as 1.7% has attracted wide attention in both the scholarly press and the popular media. Many reviewers are not aware that this figure includes conditions which most clinicians do not recognize as intersex, such as Klinefelter syndrome, where instead of an XY, you have an XXY. Turner syndrome, another syndrome where the body manifests in females particular male traits because of a chromosomal deficiency. And late onset adrenal hyperplasia. If the term intersex is to retain any meaning, the term should be restricted to those conditions in which chromosomal or your genotype, sex, is inconsistent with phenotypic sex. What's phenotype or phenotypic? Genotype is what my body actually consists of at the genetic level, chromosome and so forth. A phenotype is how it appears in its apparatuses and its artifacts, or in which the phenotype is not classifiable as either male or female. Applying this more precise definition, the true prevalence of intersex is seen to be about 0.018%, almost 100 times lower than Fausto Sterling's estimate. My point isn't to quibble about percentages, although it's a huge difference, as though something is now a normative, fluid issue versus a complete, unique, obscure, gendered anomaly. It is to say that in the tragic circumstances where there is an anomaly, it's not dissimilar from physical anomalies that happen in our fallen world in a variety of situations. So let's go back to the fall for a second and move away from gendered anomalies and just highlight something. Gendered issues emerge in what's called a dysphoria. And if you have a dysphoria, it means that you have an upside down or odd or displaced feeling about things in your life. That's what a dysphoria is. So you feel dysphoric, right? You feel dysphoric. I remember speaking at an event once in a different part of the country a number of years ago. I finished speaking. Someone came up to me. It was very evident from their body that they were attempting to present themselves as female. It was also evident that they were not biologically a female, but they were, it looked like maybe hormonally on the way that direction. And they came and afterwards asked me this question. Is it possible that God could place a female soul in a male body? Is it possible that God could place a female soul in a male body? Now, if that person's standing in front of you, I don't know how you would answer that question. What I would suggest is that the individual experienced serious dysphoria. But what they did in the dysphoria is they opted to alter that which is recalcitrant rather than alter that which is fluid. Here's what I mean. How many of you feel amazing today? A few of you. Great. How many of you felt amazing every day for the last month? No. Some of you had incredibly dark days where you didn't want to get out of bed and you felt like your life was falling apart, and you reminded yourself it's actually not falling apart and tomorrow's going to be a little bit different. Listen, we have something that happens at the soulish level, but we also have something that happens even at the biological level with neuroplasticity in our brain. And that is that we can happen to things in our neural life in ways where we shift and shape our neural life. I can't shift and shape by the force of my will, my biological anatomy all by myself. I can't. My body is recalcitrant biologically against such action. And yet, ironically, I can habituate self-perception, I can habituate gratitude, I can habituate satisfaction, I can habituate contentment and fulfillment, and I get to happen to those things as a solid, sound self. Isn't it ironic that we live in a world right now where we're saying go to a doctor so that you can somehow change that which is recalcitrant, when you have in full avail to you the capacity through a disciplined process to happen to any level of dysphoria that you come upon in your life? And you can happen to it that way. That's a long aside, but an important aside. Gender is not a social construct. Gender is biological, and one of the great things you and I get to do is to match up the biology of our bodies with the soulish perceptions that we have. And God's given us all the tools in life and in His community and His Word to do that very thing. Third, polygamy is a human corruption. Because Abraham had multiple wives and Solomon had multiple wives does not mean you get to move to Delta, Utah, and to get you a third, fourth, and fifth wife and live out on a compound somewhere because you are getting close to Jesus. Okay? Your wife right now is like, you go move into Delta and I will. Sorry if you're from Delta. I like Delta. But polygamy is, and guess what? Every time you see in a text, what happens? It just falls apart. It just falls apart. In Deuteronomy 17:17, we read that kings are not supposed to take multiple wives. It says that. People say the Bible never condemns polygamy. Actually, it says, do not do it. Don't take multiple wives for yourself. Deuteronomy 17:17 to kings. Why? Because they're going to jack you up. Because you're going to start being enticed to fall. It's literally what happened to Solomon. Literally what happened to Solomon. So the idea that the Bible somehow sanctions, the Bible is telling a historical narrative, and in the narrative, read through it and you watch all the complexities, all the difficulties, all the chaos. Poor Jacob's whole life, he's a liar and deceiver by himself, but man, him having multiple wives does not help his situation at all. Read the story. Right? So you get, in the text that we're looking at here, look at it, you get, therefore a man, one, shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife. It's one-on-one, it's man and woman under an institution that God gave marriage, okay? The marital union is enhanced by properly understanding what it means to leave mommy and daddy, to leave your parents. I hope it's sad. If you got married recently and you left your parents, I hope it was hard for you. I do. I hope it was sad. I'm at that stage where I hope my children are just miserable for a little while. Not long. I don't want it long, but I want them a little while. A little while, right? I want them at some point to go, man, we had it pretty good back there. I remember Jennifer tells a story of when we got married. We were in this little apartment of like 497 square feet. I still remember every square feet of it because there was no place to hide from each other. And she walked in, one day she cut her finger, and she walked into the bathroom. She opened up the medicine cabinet to grab a Band-Aid, and there were no Band-Aids. And then it occurred to her, oh, wait, we have to buy the stuff for the cabinet because it was always there at home when you went and opened it up, right? So I hope you miss them. I hope you miss them. But I hope they don't linger around in your new house too long in terms of their presence in your marriage. It's really important to leave. Now, I want to talk about leaving for a second, because I get this, I do quite a bit of premarital counseling with couples and spend time with young couples. And I think young couples get way too, I don't know, they get kind of ornery about all this. And I understand it. You're trying to stake your claim, right? And they start talking about all of the boundaries. Boundaries. It always makes me a little bit nervous. Because I do find a tendency for people to boundary themselves to a point into oblivion, where they're all of a sudden in their own little self-dictating world and they're happy establishing it. But it actually has a bigger play into their life when they need people in their life down the line. And now they got to figure out how to rework all the boundaries that they bounded themselves off in their life. So I think leaving can be a little confusing. So I just thought I'd have a few thoughts with you on leaving well. Can I do that? Just a few thoughts with you. Here's one. On leaving well. Let authority and accountability switch. Remember, it's not a sin manus marriage, it's a cum manus marriage. If you were here, I talked about that 2 weeks ago. We talked about the wife and submission, and I talked about the fact that in the Roman world, you could leave and you could leave without the hand or with the hand. And without the hand, sin manus meant that you would leave, and as you left, the hand of authority would not be passed to the husband, but rather it would be retained by dad. Dad's the one who still calls all the shots, even though you're married to Harry over here. Right? Okay. Or you could have a marriage cum manus, with the hand. The authority goes to Harry. And one of the things Paul's trying to show is that, hey, there is a cum manus modified concept of marriage. The modification is that it's not as though she comes in enslaved to you. Rather, she volitionally is exhorted to subject herself or submit herself into and under that framework of accountability now. That's her call. She has the volitional right. In the Roman world, she didn't have that. So Paul's introduction of that is sort of a novel concept. But it still is with the hand. It still is that there's something being passed off. So that means that when that faithful day comes and little Scooter comes up and stands next to me and I give away one of my daughters to little Scooter up here. And I say, Scooter, you take care of her. I exhort him. I've already taken him through the ringer. I've already worked him over. I've already hopefully walked him through a period of my own kind of hell month. If you can't tell, I have some fantasies going on. And now Scooter has made it through. Here he is. We're going to pass him off. I really pass him off. I really pass her off. I really say, okay. And I step back from that. Right? So ladies, you need to turn to your husband at some point early in your marriage. And you need to say, okay, I'm ready to follow. It's really a biblical thing to be able to do. That's part of leaving well. It's part of leaving well. Let respect remain. Because you left doesn't mean that you don't look back and have deep, profound respect. I'm going to pick on a family in the church and embarrass them. I was on a trip to Turkey, Greece, and Italy, and I had Jessica Adams sitting here give me a card to give to Rick, her dad, on his 90th birthday. And no, I'm just kidding. It wasn't his 90th. But it was a significant birthday, and he's going to give a card to Rick. And we give it to him. I video him. We're on the bus with like 45 people, and he's reading the card. And Rick gets emotional, naturally. But here's why he gets emotional, because of the profound respect his children have for him. That's where the emotion sits, right? It sits in the respect that they have for him. Because they left. They left. But they left well in that way. They left well. Let respect remain. Don't disdain because things are different in your house than they were there. That's okay. That's okay. But don't look back with disdain at it. Don't look back with disdain. Now, you might say, if you knew the house I grew up in, Bryan, I should disdain. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. Stay connected, but not codependent to your parents. Stay connected with them, but do not be codependent. I've seen some people who stay codependent to mom and dad. And mom still is the loudest voice in Junior's life as he's trying to make a life with this new woman. But she just loves him so much. Mom needs to chill out. Mom needs to realize she had her day in the hot sun, to quote the great theologian Nacho Libre. And it's time to leave him alone for a little while. Let him settle in. Right? So stay connected, but not codependent. Not codependent. Cut the cord. Control the spousal lens. What's that mean? Very important. I always tell couples in premarital counseling this. You get the chance to control the lens by which your parents view your spouse. No one else gets to control that, but you do. So if he acts like a dipstick, and by the way, if you're new to marriage, he will. He will. A big dipstick with oil all over it from an engine. And you'll go, I don't know that he was this much of an idiot. He is, and I'm telling you now. And when he does, don't go to your mother. Don't go tell mom. She's my best friend. I don't care. It's irrelevant. Don't go to mom. Long after you've gotten over his dipstickiness, she will still be immersed in oil. She'll still be burning like an engine. And she'll think, how dare you treat my baby girl that way? And then 5 years later, when she's acting sideways towards him and you guys are way beyond it, you're going to go, what happened? You opened your mouth to your mother and it was your fault. Don't do it. Same for dad, same for sons. Don't do it. Same for guys. But you get to control it. Don't fuel the negativity. Here's what I mean. There are times when your spouse is going to have problems with their parents. It'll happen. What they don't need is you in their corner cheering on their negative battle with their own parents. You might think you're supporting. Be very careful. A lot of times, support ends up only fueling anger. Be really careful with that. There are ways to support. It doesn't mean you have to be the voice of consummate correction. It doesn't mean you have to sit on ivory tower and go, you should not be so upset with your mother and your father. You should have dignity like I do, you scoundrel. Call them up to your higher ethic. But what you should do is come alongside and pray and help them sort things through. Be a voice in their life for their own righteousness and their familial unity and good. No one is benefited by broken families at any level. None. And if you think mom and dad have too much say and you think you need to angle and help Junior sort of get away and cut the cord, I'm telling you now, that's not the way to cut the cord. It's not the way to do it. You need to be really careful with that. So don't feel negativity. And the final one is be grateful where you can. I was going to circle back to that let respect remain a little bit. You can't be grateful about everything. I know that. Some of you went through traumatic childhoods. Some of you fled from that home into the arms of your spouse, and you're really grateful, and that's good. That's good. So you might need to draw some real clear boundaries. You might have parents who are trying to be codependent on you, and you need to draw real clear boundaries. You should do that. That's part of leaving well. But where you can. It might be as small as dad worked hard and put food on the table. Maybe he was an emotional lunkhead. He was disconnected in every other way, but he worked hard. Be grateful for it. He could not have. Gratitude doesn't just cover over sin. It doesn't do that. But what gratitude does is this. Gratitude helps heal the effects of sin relationally, almost like nothing else. So just find it. Find it and fight for it. Be grateful where you can. Some things on leaving well. Well, you leave, and what does it say? Let him leave and hold fast. Now, I do want to make a point in transition. This is not an exhortation. This is not like an imperative like, you better leave and you better hold fast. It's not how it's worded even in the Hebrew. It's just a statement of fact. That is to say, if you haven't left, you're in a weirdo zone, man. You're in a weirdo land if you haven't left. Like if you're married, but you're still under the authority of, control of, in that way, like that's abnormal, that's twisted, that's not how it's supposed to function. So the point isn't an imperative, do this, do this, do this. It's just a statement. It's what's called in interpretation a gnomic, G-N-O-M-I-C statement. It just means a timeless statement. This is just the way it is in created reality. You leave and you hold fast. You used to say leave and cleave, but who knows what that means anymore. You don't say those kinds of, cleave to me, sweetheart. Ugh. Sounds icky. What's the word? The word for joined here is proskalao. I mean, to hold fast. Here's what it means. I call it the Lionel Richie term. Stuck on you, been a fool too long. You know that song? Love that song. Oh, I love some Lionel Richie. Anyway, it's my mother's fault. I was raised on Lionel Richie and Kenny Rogers. Thank you, Lord. So you have this idea of two metals being glued together. That's kalao. Two metals being. Pros is a prefix, and the word pros as a prefix means like to come together or to like move a direction toward another. Okay, so you move a direction toward another, and you're wedded together is the idea. You're pros kalao. Karl Barth had a son. The great theologian Karl Barth had a son, and he was a New Testament scholar. He wasn't as famous as his dad, but he was a really famous New Testament scholar named Marcus Barth. And Marcus Barth described this term contextually this way. It means a voluntary, passionate, close relationship which involves a man's soul and his body. What I want you to do real quick, real fast, go to Ecclesiastes in your Bibles, Ecclesiastes chapter 4 with me. Ecclesiastes 4. And I just want to show you something real quick. Ecclesiastes 4, verse 7. One statement of context. Ecclesiastes is ancient philosophy, and it's written from the standpoint of playing with a particular concept in the wind. And here's the concept. What would life be like if you could just take God away for a while? Just removed him. To do that, he uses a phrase. Here's life under the sun. Here's life in the natural world if God was removed. Okay? Keep that in mind. Verse 7. Again, I saw vanity under the sun. I saw vanity in this world where God was kind of removed out of the picture. One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there's no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and unhappy business. Do you see it? He's saying, I look under the sun and I go, here's this cat, and he's working his tail off like crazy, and he gets all kinds of wealth around him, and he is fully self-contained. He doesn't have anybody to give it to, and he dies. That stinks. Who wants that? A self-contained life with lots of money. Whoa, lots of people, right? Lots of people shoot for that. Relationships are complicated. I don't want any of that. I saw what my parents had. I don't want that. What do I want to do? Man, I'm looking to see how much I can get and have the best time I can possibly have. And the ancient wisdom echoes from the text. That'll just leave you in a pointless, vain, the word hevel, vaporous, fleeting kind of life. I was reading an article this week about, it had highlighted 4 women who all decided that they were going to marry, but they were going to marry themselves. It's a thing. It's called sologamy. I didn't even know. Like, I'd heard about it, but I didn't know what sologamy meant. So one of the girls goes and she walks down in a dress in a ceremony by herself. She walks in front of a mirror and she looks in the mirror. She recites vows to herself, right? Of commitment to herself, and then she turns around and walks back to a table where she has red velvet cake and champagne for herself as she seals the deal, marrying herself. Well, she was also in the middle of being separated from her husband. They ended up divorced. Now she's remarried to a man. So I don't know if that's polygamy, sologamy, or what that is, but now she's remarried to another man. Now, here's what's happening. What is all that? It's silly foolishness. But the silly foolishness is a psychological way of trying to arrive at a place where you can say, Stuart Smalley-ish, darn it, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and I don't care if anybody loves me, but I love myself. And so some people, therapists, champion things like sologamy because now you can stand on your own 2 feet, girl. You don't need a man. You can look in the mirror and go, I love some me. There's some problems there. Some big problems there. One is the idea that somehow you'll actually arrive at being able to embrace yourself better alone than in community. That's wrong. That's wrong. Your perception accurately of who you are will not come in a mirror. It will come because you put the mirror away and you begin to look in the eyes of other people and engage in authentic relationship with all of its rubs and all of its roiling and all of its toiling and all of its frustration, on and on. You'll figure out what it actually means. You'll learn what it is that a marital union, for example, allows you to learn how to really partner selflessly. You won't find that by radically committing yourself to yourself. Can I share something with you? You've been committed to yourself for far too long. You've been committed. No, I felt horrible about I know, and that has become your sense of committed self. The issue is not your commitment to yourself. The issue is your perception of yourself as it relates to who God made you to be. And He gave you, if you don't have the gift of singleness, He gave you a covenant as a gift for you to find out what that actually ends up looking like in beauty and in flourishing. Look at the text again. 2 are better than 1. Why? Because they have a good reward for their toil, for if they fall, one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Well, one of the things that joining together does is it gives you mutual support. It gives you mutual support. You can support another, and they can support you. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? It brings mutual comfort, not just support. Mutual comfort. Like the warming of the egg that I mentioned to you, the word cherish from last week, earlier in the Ephesians 5 text. And though a man might prevail against one who's alone, 2 will stand with him. A 3-fold cord is not quickly broken. Don't over-spiritualize that. I know it's fashionable to go, yeah, it's God and then us 2. No, you're reading too much into the text. The text doesn't have that particular in view. The text is just making a pithy wisdom statement. The wisdom statement is, take a cord, wrap it in another cord, and wrap it in another cord, and guess what you get? A stronger cord. It's just making a point that practically speaking, you offer mutual strengths to each other. When I was in the throes of falling apart with anxiety in 2012, and I'm over at the movie theaters over here at Jordan Landing, and I collapsed in the middle of the foyer of the movie theater, I remember coming to with my wife smacking my face with an EMT standing behind her. Right? And I thought, what is happening to my life? I needed, still need, but I needed for a season the strength of my wife in a way that was indescribable. I couldn't texturize it until I experienced it, to know what it meant for someone to walk in darkness with me. Right? I needed that. That's one of the things that joined together, glued together, stuck on you, allows. And it's not that you got to get stuck. It's that you are stuck. Stop turning around and punching each other over it. Stop being like siblings who share a room. Instead, be like a couple who offers support and comfort and strength in the context of a world where the alternative of living for wealth and living for self-fulfillment is vain. Go back to your text, and we're going to finish up. The last 2 points are real quick. Each personality is enlarged by the inclusion of the other. Richard Beatty, New Testament scholar, said, ideally effecting the perfect blending of two separate lives into one. Continuity with the old personality is not broken, but the radical transformation of resulting from the intimate personal encounter creates a new self. The transformation of these people coming together doesn't mean you lose yourself. It means you might find who you really are in that context. So we finish, and you read verse 32. This mystery is profound. And I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. The marital union is enhanced by Christ and his church. So I don't feel like participating in the union the way I ought to. This is why the link up is here for you in terms of the exhortation of the text for you. That I'd go and I'd say, man, she's driving me nuts! How does Jesus act when the church is absolutely out of step with him? What's he do? What kind of person is he? What texturizes his love? How is the church supposed to be? He ain't Jesus! I know, we established that. He never will be. What are you supposed to be as the church? What's it mean to characterologically reflect the rhythms of God's ransomed kingdom in your daily life? And then you re-anchor yourself, not to him and not to her. That's never going to work. You don't anchor there. You anchor here. And you rappel down into the cavern of marriage, anchored to God, Christ and his church. And then you get the summary. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself. And let the wife see that she respects her husband. The marital union is enhanced by ownership of individual and exclusive responsibility. Do you see the language? Pay attention again. Let each one of you love his wife as himself. Let the wife see that she respects her husband. So, husband, you put on your Clydesdale little doohickeys, blinders, and you walk forward. And as I've told you 1,000 times, and I'll tell you 1,000 more if the Lord tarries, stop looking over to see if she's cleaning her side of the street. Stop looking. Stop looking to see if she's doing her part. Stop listening to the siren song of, I can't keep doing this if she doesn't. Stop it. Just walk in obedience. You're tethered to God, not her. husbands or wives, blinded. I'm supposed to follow his leader, and look at where he. Just stay tethered to God. Stay tethered to God. If you look to pray. If you look to encourage. But lay down the I'll do if they do mentality. Hardly anybody says it. It sounds way too selfish. We keep that selfishness for ourselves. But lay it down. It is your responsibility as a husband to sacrificially love your wife. No one else can do that. You're the only person in the world for that job. Wives, you're the only person commanded by God to live in submission and respect to your husband. It's you. That's it. You have to take it seriously. Why? Because he instituted it with the mentality that if you did those things, the fruit that would come out of that life, oh man, be transformative for generations. God, pray that you would help us. Give us the wherewithal, the capacity, the ability, the drive, the stick-to-itiveness, the mentality to live our lives in our roles in marriage in such a way that you get honor and glory. Thank you for the institution of a covenant union that binds us first to you and then to each other. And I pray that you would help us to sort of kick against the baser urges of our nature and walk in joy in that unity. In Jesus' name, amen.